Welcome everyone. Please take your seats. So it feels like I was just here opening the conference, but it's actually we're here for the last act, and it's certainly one to cherish. So it's my pleasure to welcome Lin Peng from Baruch College, who was one of the people at and still is at the frontier of the social economics and finance revolution. And today she will in fact talk to us about the role of social networks and financial markets. So Lin, thank you so much for being here. I really look forward to your talk. And please, if you have questions, ask them throughout so we can have a more interactive time, and we'll finish at 5:30. So please, Lin, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. And first, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the conference organizers, Mikhail and Thierry, for putting together such a fabulous program. And also thank you for all the participants who have learned tremendously from the presentations, from the discussions, and also the lively Q&A discussions during breaks and everything. So yeah, thank you very much for this excellent opportunity. So the title of my talk is the role of social networks in financial markets. So the idea that social networks, social interactions are extremely important goes thousands of years back in the ancient Greek times, as quoted by a quote by Aristotle: "Humans are by nature social animals." And this idea that social interactions, social networks are also extremely important in economic activities and in financial market is also highlighted in Schiller's 89 book. In particular, he mentioned that investing is social activity, and investors spend a substantial amount of time discussing investments, read about investments, or gossiping about investments with their friends and with their social network peers. Okay, both their successes or failures. Okay, however, the traditional rational and behavioral models of financial markets instead have largely ignored this social dimension. Instead, they assume that people form beliefs and they make decisions in what's called a social vacuum. So the only exception that they can learn from each other is not directly, it's rather indirectly by observing equilibrium prices or trading quantities. Okay. However, there's been a substantial amount of empirical evidence emerging in the last 10, 20 years or so, showing that social interactions not only affect the decisions of retail investors, but they also could be quite important for the decisions of professional investors. So a basic question is, how does social learning affect investor behavior? Okay, so on the one hand, it helps social interactions, social network helps to disseminate valuable information that reduces information frictions and improve decision making. Okay. On the other hand, there's abundant both theory as well as empirical evidence shows that social interactions can also propagate incorrect beliefs or naive trading strategies that amplify behavioral mistakes and that lead to inefficient outcomes. Okay, so I say this, I was thinking of, this is my two-handed economist. So there was a famous quote by one of the former US President, Harry Truman, which says, well, please give me a one-handed economist, because all his economists have always been saying on one hand, but they say on the other. Okay, so this is my two-handed economist thing. So therefore, the effect of social networks on financial markets remain an open question, and it's likely to have different implications depending on the specific context that we're looking into. Okay, so in David Hirschleifer's AFA presidential address in 2020, he basically proposed this new paradigm called social economics and finance. So he referred to this as a missing chapter in our understanding of finance. Essentially, is the social process through which that people's opinions have been influences, and therefore how this impacts important economic outcomes. Okay. And I would like to argue, and I think through a lot of the discussions in today's in this conference, is that the effect of social networks in people's decision making in economics and in finance contexts are even more crucial today, right? So as of now, close to 3 billion of world's population has been active Facebook users. That's about 30% of the world population, and according to a recent survey by Pew Research, about 70% of U.S. adults are active Facebook users, and more than 70% of them use it on a daily basis. Okay, and the Facebook user also spans a large range of demographic groups. And here I'm just using Facebook as an example, but clearly this is not the only social media people are using these days, right? So for the younger generation, they use YouTube and TikTok. For the more beautiful people, they're on Instagram, right? And for people who are important or believe they are important, they're on Twitter, right? So basically the idea is that social networks, social media really shapes people's opinions and beliefs and potentially influence their actions. Okay. And there are several reasons, right? So the importance of social networks, because of the nature is, zero cost, right? It's incredibly convenient to spread information. So it tends to have kind of a snowball kind of effect on information transmission. It can, information can rapidly spread across, or information or misinformation can rapidly spread across social networks. And especially we have attention constraints, right? So when we're overloaded, there's a paper on information overloads, right? So we're overloaded with information, right? So that makes us more susceptible to the influences of our peers, right? So you are more likely to be influenced by people who believe are like you, are smarter, right? Like you, right? And therefore, this means that the social networks effect can be quite important when people are overwhelmed with this abundant information. Okay, so this makes this important question is, how do social networks influence the social, political, and economic outcomes? Okay, so here I'm just going to give you like some examples of the several projects that I'm working on, or projects I've worked on, that looks at different contexts through which social networks affect economic decisions. And by no means these are representative or comprehensive. I think that these are kind of just the beginning steps that we take to attack this comprehensive and nuanced and complex role of social network effects in financial markets. And I have to say that I have learned a tremendous deal from the people that I've worked with, which I list here. I will not go over the papers in detail or the names in detail, but we've looked at the effect of social networks in different contexts. So we've looked at how social networks affects the asset allocation decisions of fund managers, and how this potentially influences the firm's valuation or the liquidity of the stocks of these firms. We looked at, in fact, in the paper that I will highlight a bit later in today's talk, is we looked at how the effect of social networks influence how price react to one of the important corporate information announcements released by corporations. We also look at how the social networks can potentially facilitate the information flow between the managers of the companies, and that lead to co-movements in both firm fundamentals as well as in the strategies that the companies adopt, and therefore could also contribute to the return co-movements of these companies. And we've also looked at how the social network can transmit valuable information that facilitates both the lending and borrowing decisions on the FinTech lending platforms, as well as on crowdfunding markets. Okay, so far, these are kind of examples where the effect of social network is potentially efficiency improving. Okay, on the other hand, we've also looked at a context where the social networks can generate or amplify inefficiencies. So we've shown that again, in the same paper that I will mention, will highlight a bit more later, we show that the social interactions could lead to more disagreement and therefore leads to excessive trading and result in investor losses. And in another project, we've looked at how the social network and the social discussions about potentially meme stocks can generate excessive attention into these type of stocks and therefore amplify the overvaluation of such securities. Okay, so again, I think this is a open area, and I think a lot of research can be generated. And again, I look forward to your comments and suggestions and any new ideas on the effect of social network in economic activities as well as financial markets. So here I would like to use the remaining part of the talk to focus on one of the papers I just mentioned. So the paper is joined with David Hirschleifer and Qiguang Wang, in which we look at how news diffuses in social networks and how that influences the way in which investors react to earnings news, as well as how the market, in terms of prices, in terms of volatility, in terms of volume, react to the news. Okay, so in particular in this paper, we study how social networks influence the dissemination of earnings information. So why earnings information? Well, it is one of the most important corporate announcements that's publicly available, okay? But despite of its public nature, right, there is a huge literature in accounting and finance shows that there is inefficiencies in the market, by the market, incorporating this information, right? So this is the famous post-earnings announcement drift anomaly. And with a lot of discussions earlier this afternoon about, is this, mispricing, is it risk, right? And what if we put on the Chicago hat, right? What would we say, right? Well, even pharma had to admit that this post-earnings announcement drift anomaly is the granddaddy of on-direction events. Okay, so because of its importance, both in information as well as in terms of an important anomaly, we choose to focus on this earnings information and use that as an example to see how earnings information, right, and in particular markets' inability to timely incorporate this information can be mediated or can be influenced by the effect of social networks. So we explore how the earnings news, okay, can be transmitted across the social network of investors, and how investors' beliefs about companies' valuation can be influenced by the social transmission of this news, and how this determines their trading actions and asset price dynamics. Okay. Is there any questions so far? Yeah, so I've tried to make this simple. Okay, there are a lot of interesting papers, and some are easier to understand, some are harder to understand. This will be the easier papers. Okay, so the idea behind our setting is that we have several premises, right? So the first premise is that to understand why investors underreact, why the market underreact to earnings news, we're assuming that not all investors are immediately attentive to earnings news. So therefore, the news will first attract the attention of the local investors, and then through the social discussions, through the discussions between the local investors with their social network peers, some of them could be close by social peers, some of them could be distant social peers, but through this discussion, information gets disseminated across the broader investor network, okay? And this is motivated by existing empirical evidence that people tend to have this kind of local bias, right, in the kind of what firms they are likely to pay attention to and what firms they are likely to trade upon, okay? And then as a result, because of this social transmission of earnings news, we also like to say that the news will be transmitted if the news is seeded from a central node of the investor social network. Okay, and this assumption is motivated by the influential work by Banijol et al., which says that, well, if you're trying to spread some important news such as microfinancing or information about vaccination, if you see the news from the central nodes of the social network, it becomes much more widely disseminated and with a faster speed. Thank you.
No, it's just a dumb qualification question. I mean, for Amazon, what would be local?
For Amazon will be local. So yeah, so very good question. So in our specific, in our analysis, the main analysis is going to be, the location of the firm, which I'll have in the next slide or so. It's basically the headquarter location of the company. But you're right? So for some companies, their footprint is actually spread much way beyond their headquarter location. So we also look at a robustness check where we only focus on firms, we exclude firms with with main operations across more than like 3 states, right? And our result remains quite robust. Yeah. Okay. And the other thing is what we show in the paper, well, actually we found that we didn't put in the final version of the paper, is that the effect turns to be bigger not for the biggest firms, right? Because you would think that for the biggest firms, it's well known, a lot of investors trade on that. So the results actually more stronger for kind of mid-sized to the smaller firms, which turn to be kind of more local compared to something like Amazon. Yeah, thank you, Simona.
And do you think of investors with different sophistication being more or less reliant on these networks? And if so, would your prediction be that less sophisticated investors are likely to enter in a more spread out way than the more sophisticated ones?
Yeah, I think that's also a great question. So for this particular context that we're looking at, right? So when we think that the investors who are more likely to have attention constraints, right? These are kind of the retail investors, right? More likely to be retail investors. They are more likely to without the, they are more likely to be information constrained. So you would think that this kind of underreaction to earnings news is more likely to be more pronounced for firms with high retail ownership. Okay. However, so given 2 firms with same retail ownership, but the firms located in a high centrality place or else equal, is likely to have much faster information diffusion among the investors. Okay, and that's also what we find, that the effect is also stronger for firms with greater retail ownership. Yeah, but we didn't have that result in this draft because the paper is getting long, and I guess somewhat people find that not very surprising that the anomalies, the ex-ante anomalies, are bigger for the smaller firms, for the more high retail ownership firms. Okay, but your intuition is absolutely right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so basically we going to the second bullet point. So basically our promise is that the news is going to be transmitted faster if it's seeded from the central nodes of the social network, in a sense applying the same logic as Banerjee et al. So if the earnings news by firms located in high centrality location, okay, it's going to be spread faster compared to those that's located in low centrality locations of investor social network. Okay, and then we're going to look at how social interactions shape people's beliefs, okay, their trading activities and prices. So to give you a quick preview of the results, what do we find? So we measure social networks of investors using the Facebook data, and we look at announcements, earnings announcements by firms in high centrality versus low centrality locations. So we find that the announcements from the high centrality locations, it triggers a much higher immediate responses in both prices, in terms of volatility, and in terms of volume. Okay. However, when we look at post-announcement dynamics, post-announcement we mean days 2 through 61, so that's 61 trading days. So that's about 3 months after the initial announcement. So we see that the high centrality announcements are accompanied by weaker post-announcement drift, which suggests that prices are more efficient, okay, lower anomalies, right? And we also observe faster volatility decline, which again is consistent with more efficient prices. On the other hand, and also surprisingly, we show that the high centrality announcements is also followed by a relatively greater volume and more persistent trading volume. Okay, so, and in our paper, we show that this is somewhat challenging, and this is not something that one can easily explain using the traditional models, okay? So traditional models, either rational models or models with static disagreement, would both predict that if information quickly spreads throughout the investor social network, is gonna be accompanied by both, by faster decay in both volume as well as in price volatility. Okay, so but this is opposite to what we find. Okay, and then so therefore in the paper we propose a new model, new hypothesis, which we refer to as the social churning model. Okay, so in the model, the way it works is that the social transmission of news first will attract the attention from more and more investors. Okay, but this social transmission process will also introduce mutations, introduce errors, introduce noises, okay, in investors' beliefs, okay? And the discussion of the news among people in the social network who have received the news is such that it will create sustained attention to the news and therefore sustained fluctuations in their beliefs about the asset fundamentals, okay? So we show that this model or this hypothesis provides a unified explanation for the dynamics of return, volatility, and volume, okay? And finally, we provide granular evidence that supports the prediction of the model in the way in which investors communicate with each other, how they allocate attention, and what determines their trading. So the way we provide this granular evidence is to use account level information based on the stock trading activities, look at Google search activities, and also we look at the household trading records. Question, yes.
Yeah, so first a clarification on the centrality. So do you measure it by looking at like how many other nodes a certain node is connected to?
Yeah.
Is that roughly?
Yeah, I'll get to the key empirical measure in I think one slide.
All right. Yeah. But so if that is roughly the centrality, so my logic in terms of like what's the sort of pattern of transmission would be from a central node, many other nodes would get sort of firsthand information. Yeah. So there would be like relatively few links in the transmission chain, right? And to my mind, that should actually reduce the number of mutations and maybe lead to a less persistent volume effect.
Yeah. So here again, right? So here it's a kind of a reduced form model. So what we're saying is that transmission itself introduces noises, right? But once investors have received the news, the discussion among them could also generate additional noises. Okay, so again, we're not saying that this is necessarily the structure of social transmission across all the settings, but we're saying that this particular structure seems to be a sensible explanation of the empirical results we find. Yes.
So one prediction maybe of this type of is that because you have propagation of the news quickly, then yes, you have less drift and the price become more efficient quickly. But because over time signals become noisier because of this mutation, you reach efficiency more quickly, but the price is less informative about the next earnings announcement. You can get to price efficiency without the price being super informative about the next, let's say, the next payoff, the next earnings announcement. So it seems that there will be a tension here between getting quickly to an efficient level and getting more informative, which is not exactly the same thing.
Okay, yeah. So that's an interesting angle theory. We haven't thought too much about it. So the way we classify efficiency here is just that there's a lower post-earnings announcement drift, which means this particular information is much better incorporated into prices. So I guess I have to think a bit more about what that means for kind of, for the efficiency, like trying to predict future news. For now, I think that our statement is kind of unconditional statement. We're not saying that is in terms of how, if you think about like the rational expectations models, we're not looking at the distance between the prices and the unobservable true value V, right? The distance we're not necessarily looking at that. We're just saying that how much the current price incorporates the previous the most recent information revealed in earnings. Okay, but we can think more about that and perhaps have additional empirical tests to look at forecasting future earnings. Yeah, okay, great suggestion, thank you. All right, okay. So that's a preview of results. Getting back to Mikhail's question, so how do we measure social network and how do we measure the centrality of firms' locations in the investor social network? So here for our asset pricing test, the main variable, the social network of investors and the kind of the connectedness between investors across different areas is going to be based on the Facebook data on the social connectedness index SCI measure. And why Facebook? Well, it's as mentioned earlier, is the world's largest online social network service site. A majority of the US adults use it, and a lot of them use it actively on daily basis. And also survey evidence shows that most of the people's Facebook links are real world friends and family and acquaintances, okay? And then this measure has, been recently proposed by the Bailey et al. Paper, and there has been increasing number of papers adopting this measure, and applying that into different contexts. They show that even though this Facebook measure is only available in the last couple of years, but it seems to do a fairly reasonable job in capturing the kind of slow-moving, long-run social connectedness between people across different regions, right? So the people, the papers I listed here, and also we describe in our paper, have shown that it's associated with historical migration patterns, international trades, the spillover of innovation, technology, people's attitude towards things like COVID or about housing prices, as well as in upward mobility. Okay, so again, we're not saying this is a perfect proxy for this for measuring the social ties between people, but that seems to be a reasonable proxy, and that is possibly it's related to important economic activities, and there's so far we're using this in our analysis as a proxy for the real world friendship links across people, and in particular we're using this as a proxy for the social networks across different regions in terms of investors' social network. Okay. What do we define as the local investor base? We define the local investor base as investors from the firm's headquarters county. But as in my reply to the previous question, we also did a robustness check in case the firm's presence is above and beyond these headquarters locations, and the results are robust. And so how do we define firm centrality? So essentially we have at the county level, we have this county by county matrix of all the counties in the United States. And therefore the centrality of the headquarters of the company is basically the centrality of the node of the county that firm headquartered in the whole matrix of the various counties in the US. Okay, and we have different measures of centrality. The main analysis that I present is going to be based on the eigenvector centrality, but we also, in the paper, we show that the results are robust to other measures such as degree centrality as well as information centrality. And also in our more granular analysis, we also provide evidence using an alternative way of measuring social networks. So not relying on the Facebook measure, we basically construct a different set of social network based on the stock tweet users, based on their posting activities. And so we show that, so this kind of a out of sample test for our Facebook based results. Okay, so first a heat map of the centrality of the cities in the United States or counties in the United States. So as you can see, the counties on the West Coast and the counties on the East Coast, they are tend to be the kind of the high centrality locations. And so the centrality is going to be positively associated with the several socioeconomic demographic statistics, right? Not surprisingly, the more central places are places with high population density, places with a younger population, places with less retired population, and places with high kind of tendency turnover. So people tend to like live in the same place for a shorter time. Okay, so we're going to try to control for all these demographic characteristics. Okay, so these are the other important variables. So we look at all the stocks traded on the three major exchanges. The key variables, in addition to the social network measures, our earnings surprises are from the usual IBIS database, and we obtain the headquarter locations of the company from the ADGA, and we compute the typical DGTW abnormal returns and abnormal volume. And we control for basically all what has been proposed in the literature that can explain how market react to earnings news. We control for firm characteristics that may influence visibility or the salience of the earnings signal. So we control for size, book to market, institutional ownership, idiosyncratic volatility, earnings volatility, earnings persistence, the visibility of the firm, okay, whether the firm belongs to a retail sector or not, that influences, how retail investors may be attentive to the earnings news, whether the firm belongs to the S&P 500 index, and how much money the firm spends on advertising expenses. In the robustness check, we also control for analyst coverage, as well as media coverage, both pre-announcement as well as post-announcement. Question?
Yeah, so this is about the previous page. I understand that we reduce the network from a person-to-person network to a county-to-county network.
Yes.
Right. So a detailed question is, what's the connection intensity between two counties? How is that defined? Is it how many links, or is it the share of link?
Yeah, so basically the Facebook SAI measure is basically based on the number of friendship links between the two counties. So it's aggregated to the county level.
So it's a number aggregated to the county
It's
level.
a number, but scaled by LA to LA, the connection, Facebook friendship links. Yeah.
So maybe this is too detailed. This is to some extent, if depending on how we scale that, the eigenvalue centrality can have a mechanical relationship just with how large the size of the node by itself.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So but one would also say that the size of the node, right? So if the place has more people, right, you're going to generate more intense social interactions, right? So the size effect is potentially, is what influences the degree of social interactions. Yeah. But another kind of a broader point is that to what extent is the centrality measure based on Facebook capturing unobservable, or things that we do not control in our analysis, something about the characteristics of the county per se. So I think that is better addressed in our more granular analysis, in which we have firm fixed effect, we have household fixed effect, right? So basically whatever that, that's specific to that county is going to be soaked up by the firm fixed effect. Yeah, okay, but happy to discuss that in later results. Okay, so we also control for announcement characteristics, reporting lag, whether there is confounding news, the number of same-day announcements, seasonality in earnings announcements or reactions. And also I mentioned earlier, post-announcement analysts and the media coverage. We also control for county characteristics, population density, whether it is an urban county or not, the average age, percentage of retirement population, the average education level, average income, and length of tenancy, and the percentage of population that works in the same industry as the firm, right? Potentially, again, controlling for people's attention or potentially private information about this particular earnings announcement. Okay, so results. Okay, so the first set of results is on how returns react to earnings announcements. And we use follow the literature. So basically we are looking at the cumulative normal return as a function of both the SU, but also as interaction between the SU and the centrality itself, but also all the control variables, as well as the control variables interacted with SU. Okay, so the key variable of interest is beta 2. So basically how centrality can augment the sensitivity of the returns responses to the earnings surprises. Okay, so here I'm not giving you tables to read. I know this is the end of the day. And so here I'm just going to plot the economic magnitudes of our findings. Okay, so what do we find? So again, so these bars represent the relative economic magnitude when we increase centrality from the 1st to the 10th decile. Okay, how much, what's the percentage of increases or decreases in the return responses to the earnings surprises, okay, relative to the mean of that particular measure. Okay, so here, again, here we're not plotting the level of the abnormal returns, okay, but rather the average, but the responses of returns to the earnings surprises, okay, this response coefficient, okay, when we change the centrality measures from the low to high centrality, okay? So what do we find? So for the same change in centrality, for the 0-1 window, which is a 2-day announcement window around the earnings announcement, high centrality, increased centrality, so firms, announcements from firms in high centrality locations have about 30% greater immediate return responses. However, if you look at the post-earnings announcement drift, okay, again, so high centrality announcements have much muted post-earnings announcement drift. Okay, so what this says is that the social interactions potentially facilitate faster diffusion of information, okay, that improves price efficiency. You get much sharper, much more responsive prices right around earnings announcements, and that reduces the post-earnings announcement drift in the next 3 months. Okay, question, yes. Well, you can just say it, yeah, that's fine.
Do you ever look at the pre-announcement do you ever look at pre-announcement effects? It's interesting to see like information diffusion, or like inside information leakage.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have not looked at the pre-announcement effect and what centrality plays in this, because in this paper, we're mostly interested in actually really the puzzle is in the post-announcement window, where we see distinctly different pattern in the price volatility persistence relative to the volume persistence. So that's kind of the focus of the paper. But I agree with you that looking at pre-announcement dynamics could also be very interesting. But perhaps we'll address that in a subsequent analysis. Yeah.
Just a quick question. I understand you control for a lot of characteristics at the firm level, but wouldn't there be some selection in which counties the firms choose to elect as headquarters? And couldn't that correlate with things like labor market conditions that could be related to the needs of the firm? And so there could be something specific about these types of firms that correlates with centrality. Like, how do you think about
absolutely.
that in the
Yeah, so this is a very legitimate concern with, and we've been thinking a lot about this, right? So it's potentially counties with high centrality in this our network measure could be special, right? They could be special in the ways that we have not control for. So there are two ways we address this concern. One is, as later on when we looked at more granular data, we look at stock Twitter user level activities, right? So there we can have firm fixed effect, right? So that absorbs all the county common characteristics. And when we look at the household trading data, actually we can do even further. We can have both household fixed effect as well as firm fixed effect. So we're looking at within household holding different stocks, but some stocks are located in places that they share stronger social ties. Some other stocks have different social ties. So really we're looking at kind of within household variations and within firm variations, right? So the same stock, but you held by different households with different social ties with the places with the headquarters of the stock, right? So I think the household fixed effect and county or firm fixed effect can alleviate those questions. And we also have additional set of analysis based on natural disaster shock, Hurricane Sandy. So we look at, two counties ex ante have the same centrality, but one county, a lot of the centrality is from greater social ties with New York, Pennsylvania, those states that's affected by Sandy, and the others are not. So we show that the counties with greater social connectedness to the affected regions during Hurricane Sandy, the result gets weaker. So hopefully we can get to that when we show the natural disaster results. Okay.
So I have a question about the interpretation of the beta-2 coefficient. Because here one possible interpretation is that in more central areas, more central locations, there is less information production before the earnings announcement. And so you have a larger response of the price to the public news, basically. So, and that might be consistent with the second finding, with what I was saying before, by the way, which is because of your mechanism, you have more noise in the price before, the next earnings. And so the next earnings is more informative. But the beta-2, I think, suggests that maybe these are locations where where there is also less information production before the public news for some reason.
Yeah, so I think, right, so I think it goes kind of, again, related to Simana's question, right? This may be something else about the county that centrality happened to be correlated, right? So about information production. So in the robustness check, we did try to control for some of that, right? Like analyst coverage, like news media coverage, and the result remains robust. But again, right, there's, maybe these are not good perfect proxies, right? So maybe we still left out something, right? So I think again, perhaps we can get to like the more granular analysis using, we look at individual account level activities that can help some, alleviate some of the concerns.
Maybe you could look at the quality of analysis forecast before the announcement.
Right. Yeah, like the average accuracy of the forecast here. Yeah, so we could do that. Yeah, but I think another thing related to your question is that even let's say this result is driven by for example these high centrality places are places with poor information environment, right? So for example, right, again, it's kind of the traditional way of thinking, even with, either rational or kind of people with different opinion, right? It will be hard to explain, which I'll show later, right? This faster decay in return responses, but high and elevated and persistent trading volume. Okay, which we can talk about more when we get to that results. There's another question? Yeah.
A small, clarification question.
Yeah.
So as I understand, the stock return data is from 1996 until quite recently.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the measure for the centrality seems to be either constant or quite recent, no?
Yeah.
Do you do any maybe robustness check by limiting the time period since their Facebook appearance?
Yeah, so we did also in the robustness check, we have subsample analysis, which we split the sample into kind of the first half and the second half, and the results are pretty robust in both. Yeah. And also, as I mentioned, we also, instead of using Facebook to construct the network measure, we use the stock trade data to construct the network measure. And so that basically, is time varying, and we also show that the result seems to be consistent. Okay. Yeah.
So maybe it anticipates a bit on the rest of the presentation. I was curious about the channels through which information would be incorporated. Do you have in mind the fact that thanks to social network, retail investors will trade this stock? Or maybe the tweet data are used as a feed for algos who would then trade on this feed?
Yeah, so very good question. I don't think we have a complete answer to your question, but in a more granular analysis, we'll show that the structure of the social network is associated with very interesting patterns of how the way in which people post messages on stock trade message boards, on how their a disagreement is generated and kind of evolve over time, and also associated with the actual trading by households. So I'll be happy to discuss those more granular evidence with you, and we can talk about to what extent this kind of helps us to understand the underlying channels through which this social transmission explains people's beliefs and actions. Okay. All right. Okay. So first result seems to show that the high centrality news from the high centrality nodes seems to be incorporated into prices much faster, leaving much less post-earnings announcement drift, which reduces basically the mispricing. What happens about trading volume? Okay, so we do the same analysis. We look at log abnormal trading volume and to see how that is a function of the centrality. Okay, so again, we look at the change. We look at the change from the first to the 10th decile in centrality of the news of the company that released the news, and we look at how much of a volume response relative to the average volume response for the corresponding time period. Okay, so for the 2-day announcement period, we see a significant increase in volume for the high centrality announcements relative to the low centrality announcement. It's about the difference between high and low centrality announcements for the same type of earnings news is close to 15% relative to the mean abnormal volume in the 2-day period, okay? But however, if we look at the post-announcement period of the 3-month period, again, comparing to the average abnormal volume during that period, the high centrality announcement triggers substantially greater level of volume, okay, which is close more than 30%, okay? So this seems to suggest that the effect of centrality on how price react to information versus how volume react to information is distinctly different, okay? Another look at the different dynamics between returns and volume and the volatility versus the volume is we can directly estimate the persistence parameter, okay? So there are different ways to estimate the persistence parameter. So here we show you that we use the FEMA model of Bolster and Drubinski, which we estimate the fractional integration parameter D in either the volatility, which is the daily absolute return, that's our daily volatility proxy, or the daily abnormal volume. Okay. Alternatively, we can also just estimate it with simple AR1 process. We use the AR1 parameter. The results are quite comparable. So here, what we see is that again, increasing, if we increase the centrality of the news, okay, it significantly reduces the persistence of the volatility, but it significantly increases the persistence of the volume. Okay. So what this suggests is that this sharp contrast in the persistence of these two quite related variables, volume versus volatility, right? But they have such different patterns. So, and as mentioned earlier, the traditional models, right? You could have a rational model, or you could have models where people have disagreement, right? Do the heterogeneous priors or heterogeneous models interpret information? But as long as this heterogeneous opinion is kind of static, it will not be able to generate, at least to our knowledge, it's hard to reconcile with the findings that we have. So therefore, we propose this social churning hypothesis. So the idea is that news would diffuse across the network of inattentive investors through social interactions. Okay, so the social interactions triggers disagreement and as well as shifts in disagreement. Okay, so this premise is motivated by both, by the anecdotal evidence suggested in Schiller's book, by recent models proposed in Jackson, Maladi, and McAdams, that social transmission generates noises, mutations, as well as by recent empirical evidence suggesting that the discussions among social network groups or subgroups can trigger kind of echo chambering. So rather than people converge through social interactions, actually they could also lead to greater divergence in opinions. Okay, so as a result, the news from the high centrality locations, it first diffuses much broadly, quickly to a wide set of audiences, but it also triggers very intense discussions, and that leads to very persistent attention of the investors on this, discussing about these firms, right? So it could be that I talked to Mikhail, I said, and Mikhail convinced me that, the Silicon Valley Bank is such a bad, is such a bad shape. So I basically said, well, I should, take my deposit and I should run, right? But theory said, well, perhaps not so, right? There could be bailout, right? And so basically every time I talk to, when you talk to different social network peers, you may end up with different opinions, and it fluctuates even though there's no new news from the company, but persistent attention and discussions in the social network could trigger these kind of fluctuations in disagreement, okay? And that leads to persistent trading of these companies. On the other hand, to this extent that these beliefs are idiosyncratic, okay, and therefore they may not affect equilibrium prices. So this kind of explains why high centrality news, on the one hand, generates persistent disagreement, persistent trading volume, but also at the same time is consistent with more efficient prices. Okay. So we argue that this hypothesis provides a unified explanation for the kind of different patterns we see in price in return in volume. Yes.
I was wondering if you could maybe provide a bit more intuition. How does this model explain the reduction in volatility? Because again, to my mind, like more noise trading, more disagreement would mean there's
yes.
Price goes.
So that's the kind of the traditional notion, right, by like Kendall Pearson, right? Because volatility and volume kind of goes hand in hand, right? And the idea is because, you know, even people with different opinions, right? They, you know, they update, right? And they trade, right? But they trade once. They, you know, if there's no new information, right? There's no need to continuous trade. Okay, so that's why we say, well, if there's additional ways for people's opinion to fluctuate, to disagree, even in the absence of new news, right? If social discussions, right? If discussions can generate all these additional noises and belief differences, right? That potentially leads to persistent trading.
Yeah, I get that. So I get the part how your model explains increased volume, but what I'm still not sure about, how does your model still explain the drop in volatility?
Yeah. So think about what causes volatility, right? Price fluctuation, right? So if price quickly converges, right? So there's less movement in the post-announcement period. So that predicts decay in the volatility persistence.
But you need a drop in information production. So you just have pure noise trading in a sense.
Exactly.
And you need dealers, people, you know, in the market, not to accumulate too large position. I mean, that's another.
Yes.
Those are two. I mean, maybe the drop in information production is consistent with the beta 2.
Yeah. So essentially, you can think of this way, right? Like if price quickly converges, right? There's no new price discovery. Okay. All it's left is sustained noise trading.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if there is a lot of noise trading, informed guys, people should be very happy to produce information, to produce additional information, unless the cost of, unless these are stocks for which producing information is very costly.
Yeah, so but we're thinking of in this sense, right? If the only information is about this, how to analyze this earnings announcement, right? So that information has been discovered in the high centrality firms, right? So what's left is that people are still discussing, the noise traders are still discussing about this firm, and they still generate excessive trading on the firm. Yeah. Okay, so, and then the second part of the paper, basically we try to provide more direct evidence by looking at kind of more granular data. So we look at, the first set of data we look at is the daily stock tweets sample. We basically pass through more than 10 million messages over a very, very short time period. And then the stock tweet has been also recently used in, you know, a couple of very interesting papers to capture people's beliefs about stocks and how they discuss beliefs and how beliefs formation in the social network. Okay, so we have the following 4 key measures of the investors' activities on stock tweet. The first is the new, so each message we call that as either a new message or a reply. Okay, so if you will, a new message, we use that to proxy the number of, you know, so new message is basically the initial mentions of the stock in a thread. Okay, we use that to proxy for the number of newly informed investors in the social network. Okay, the replies are basically the replies to the initial messages in the thread, and we use that to proxy for the intensity of discussions of the stock post-announcement about in the social network. Okay, and for each message, we can also figure out what's the sentiment, and therefore for each given day, we can basically look at across the different messages, we can come up with a disagreement measure. So we can look at how disagreements evolve over time as well. And finally, as an alternative to the Facebook data, we can also identify the users on stock tweet that are influencers. So these are the users, you know, the top users ranked by the number of followers on stock tweet, and we use that as an alternative measure for the centrality of the user in the stock tweet social network. Okay, so what do we find? First, we show that the high centrality news earnings announcements indeed triggers greater investor attention to the stock. So we show that the high centrality announcements triggers a significant increase in both, a significant increase in the number of new messages, followed by a more precipitous drop, okay? On the other hand, if you look at the reply activities, so the reply for the high centrality announcements, the reply activities increase significantly both around the 2-day announcement window, but as well the elevated reply activity is persistent in the post-announcement window. Okay, so this suggests that the high centrality news generates considerable amount of attention and persistent attention, at least for a while, for a few months on StockTwit. Okay, and also we validate the StockTwit results using the Google search abnormal search result to further support that high centrality news did receive more attention and more long-lasting attention by the investors. Next, we also show that the high centrality news not only generates greater attention, but is also associated with more disagreement. Okay, so we show both high disagreement, both around the 2-day window, as well as in the 6-month, 60 trading day post-announcement window. So, and the disagreement comes both within thread as well as across thread. Okay, so this suggests that So this suggests that the high centrality announcements generates greater investor attention, sustained attention, as well as greater and more sustained disagreement on the social media. Okay, then we look at the effect of influencers. Okay, so again, these are users on StockTwit that have a large number of followers. So we show that if the stock is mentioned by an influencer within the 2-day announcement window, it generates greater reply activities, more disagreement, okay? It's also consistent with that such stocks will also have greater volume response, volume persistence, but lower volatility persistence, okay? So kind of tied back to our main asset pricing test using this alternative centrality measure based on the StockTwit data. Okay, so we argue that it's consistent with the model prediction that high centrality news disseminates quickly across investors, as we can see by the number of new users, but it continued to attract investor attention as evident by the number of replies and sustained replies. It also triggers discussions and greater disagreement post-announcement. Yes. Question 1 and then 2. Yeah.
And just a very quick clarification question. So, I mean, which type of influencers are you considering? I mean, are we considering an expert or we are considering random influencers? I was a bit curious on how you define the influencer exactly, you know, when we talk about stocks.
Yeah, so the specific way we define influencer is just people who have a large number of followers. Okay, so we did not condition on whether they are experts or not, but presumably the self-claimed or like the more influencing so-called experts on StockTwit are the ones with a large crowd following. Yeah, but we could go back and look at in more detail whether there is a tag for, you know, whether they claim themselves as kind of securities professionals or not. Yeah.
Do you think there's any economic function for this like persistent volume and disagreement?
Yeah, what do you have in mind?
Oh, well, this kind of looks like, you know, it's somehow related to building continued networks, reinforcing networks, learning.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is like speculating. But on the other hand, it could just be just junk. So you know, like these are, I don't know the answer.
So we don't use a specific function form. What we do look at is just the average level of activities over the next 3 months period. So, you know, if the average level is high and this, if we estimate like the AL1 model or the RFIMA model, if the persistent parameter is high, we say it's, you know, the dynamics is more persistent. The shock has more persistent effect.
I guess just try to clarify. I was thinking that like some of this volume seems like it's about building relationships with the influencer or influencer trying to get more, or like at least the discussion and disagreement is about like building social connections, maybe.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so Yeah, so for now, that may be something interesting to explore, but for now, our influence is measured on the number of followers prior to the announcement. So it will not be so we do not consider this feedback effect, but that may be interesting to explore, right? Like how social networks arise endogenously. Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question. Yeah. Okay, so previously we have shown that social interactions and the location of where news comes from has important, it's significantly related to how people form beliefs and how people's disagreement may evolve over time. Now we look at what do they do, right? What's their actions, right? So we look at the household trading. So for this, we use the famous Barbara-Ording data set, which is all the households trading records from a famous brokerage house in 1991 and 1996. So this is really cool because this allows us to have the more granular controls. We can have firm fixed effect, we can have household fixed effect. That really, we believe, goes a long way to alleviate the endogeneity concerns that the centrality may capture some unobserved characteristics about the county or about the firm. Okay, so the way we do this is that we know the locations of the household, right? We know the location of the firm. So basically we can classify households for a given earnings announcement. We can classify households if the households are located in places that share strong social tie with the announcement firm's location. We call this high relative SCI household, okay? So basically for each announcement, we have heterogeneity of different households who may be interested in trading the firm's stock, okay? So so basically we show that these households that has greater social, that located in places with greater social tie with the firm's headquarter location, they're more likely to trade. The trading likelihood goes up. The trading likelihood goes up by more than 8% relative to the average household, both in the 2-day announcement period, as well as considerably higher trading likelihood for the post-announcement period, okay? So we also show that they're not only more likely to trade, they also like to trade more. So the number of trades also goes up considerably, both in the announcement period as well as in the post-announcement period. And similarly, they also tend to trade a bigger size. Okay? So they trade more. Okay, the more connected households, they tend to trade more. Okay. Well, you may think, well, but perhaps social ties gives them some information advantage. Maybe this is not necessarily bad. Maybe this is informed trading, right? So let's look at their profit or loss, right, from this trading. Well, it turns out they significantly lose money. So this high connected households with strong social ties to the location of the firm, they trade more, and we say that they trade these trading are excessive. Okay, so if we increase the relative social tie between the household and firm location, again from the first decile to the 10th decile, it results in greater losses by more than 16% relative to the average house, right? So we all know that based on the Barbara-Ording study, right? Households trading, they tend to lose money, right? But these high connected, this closely connected households in kind of the social network sense, they lose more compared to the average household. And they primarily lost because of the transaction cost. If you look at their pre-transaction cost P&L, there's no significant difference. It's slightly negative, but it's not statistically significant. But what really, if we broke it down into, the trading based on the pre-transaction and the after the transaction cost, all the losses are coming from the excessive trading and the amount of commissions and price impact that they pay in their trading. Okay, so this evidence supports the model's implication that it's really the excessive trading by the high connected households, and that reflects their incorrect beliefs triggered by social interactions. Okay, so identification, we've talked quite a bit about identification already. So the kind of the main concern would be that this high centrality location could be proxy for many other things, right? So we account for such effects. We control for the observable characteristics of the county, right, of the firm. And also in our more granular analysis, we have a lot of fixed effects. But in addition, we also have additional quasi-natural experiment, Hurricane Sandy, to try to kind of provide even more further evidence. Yes.
Just it's more to the previous, related to the previous slide. Like, so are incorrect beliefs actually enough to explain excessive trading, or do those beliefs need to be changing also constantly? And if the latter, then I just wonder, like, why would those beliefs keep changing for the same household in a relatively short period of 2-3 months?
Yeah, so here I guess our rationale is that because they lose money, they trade more and they lose money, and therefore it's hard to justify that the motive for this greater amount of trading is because of rational reasons. So that's why we're saying we're not trying. So I guess our goal is more modest, right? Obviously, I think it's very interesting to try to kind of zero in on a particular household, right? Who they talk to, and do they why do they keep trading? I think we're not quite there yet. Be something we'll be happy to think about further, right? But for now, we're just saying, well, it seems to suggest that it's not because of information advantage these households are having, is really the trading excessively, and that seems to be consistent with kind of misbeliefs, irrational beliefs, rather than kind of information advantage. Yeah. Okay, but we'll be happy to keep thinking about ways in which we can perhaps provide kind of more concrete, direct example, right? Of yeah. Okay, so identification, Hurricane Sandy. Okay, so what do we do? Okay, so Hurricane Sandy is one of the biggest costless hurricane that happened in the US in 2012. It primarily impacted the mid-Atlantic regions, okay, and the effect is transitory. So we use that as a shock to the social communications across investors, because it disrupted the millions of people lost power during the period, right? So that disrupts the kind of online social communication, and therefore information transmission in the social networks that's affected in the affected region. Okay, so we have our DID analysis. So what we do is we focus on the earnings announcement by the firms in the unaffected region. Okay, so our treatment firms are firms that's not affected by Hurricane Sandy, but these firms, the treatment firms, are going to be the firms like in the Midwest or in the West Coast of the United States, but the firms with high social tie, the location of the firm has high social tie with the affected region. Okay, so we show that during Hurricane Sandy, okay, our results between centrality and how return and volume react to the earnings news is greatly dampened, okay? But if you look at the control, so for average firms or firms with similar centrality, but with low social tie, showing low social tie with the affected region, there's no significant impact of Sandy, okay? So again, we conclude that these results are unlikely, our main results are unlikely to be driven by the omitted variables that contributes to the average high centrality of a particular location. Okay, so we have a bunch of robustness check. I think I'll be well within the time limits. So we exclude the tri-state areas where you have a large presence of financial companies, potentially like you have analyst presence. We exclude firms with dispersed business operations. Is not subsumed by local bias. So basically, we get rid of the social ties with nearby counties. We talked about, we also have alternative measures, additional controls, and we have split sample period into the more recent period. The results still holds. Okay, so what do we conclude? Well, so it looks like in this setting of how social networks transmit earnings information, we provide evidence that it's really a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it makes price more efficient, reduces the post-earnings announcement drift, okay? On the other hand, it can amplify behavioral biases. People, especially the retail investors, retail household, they trade excessively. That contributes to the high trading volume and persistent trading volume well beyond the earnings announcement. And we show more direct evidence that indeed these people turn to have continued disagreement in the post-earnings announcement period. Okay, and these investors, they lose money. Okay, so what kinds of the bigger picture, right? So here I would like to, kind of ask you, right? Where do you think are the potential open questions? Here I can list a few questions, but I'd love to hear what you think. So I think there are many open questions, right? So the first is that, what are the influences of social networks, social media on beliefs, right? So in terms of the transmission of public news, scientific facts, right? About, it could be financial news, could be people's opinion about COVID, right? Could be people's opinion about climate change. How do we view the same scientific findings? How does social network transmit private information or share private information? And what about fake news, misinformation, right? And in today's, right, it's very easy to generate information, right, by AI, right? There's vast amount of data out there, people share on social media, right? Very easy to use something like ChatGPT or these large scale like machine learning models to generate, misinformation that can particularly be impactful for individual users. Second is, what's the effect of social networks on economic outcomes, right? So the decision of retail investors, institutional investors, how it influences the decision of the firms, right, and corporate strategies, firms' innovation, right? It may help to spread innovative technologies or strategies across the network of firms or supply chain networks. And there's also been recent study on how social media, social network can contribute to the viral bank runs that's happening currently in the US. And also how this social network or social capital contribute to important topics such as inequality or social mobility. Okay, and what is the policy implications of all this, and how can platforms think about design decisions that can harvest the power, the tremendous power of social network, but at the same time mitigate the potential perils. Okay. And finally, I would like to again thank you for the organizers for bring us together. I believe the effect of social network in today's and today's setting is quite beneficial, right? We get an opportunity to exchange ideas, get to find out what's the latest, the cutting edge research, and we have disagreements, and we've learned so much from each other. So I think this is definitely a tremendous positive benefit that we enjoyed in the today and yesterday. So thank you very much.